So, welcome to another edition of the Data Standard podcast experience. My name is Matt Rawl. I'm a guest host, and I'm very excited today to introduce Aristotle Socrates. He is the head of data at TextNow. And Ari, we're super excited to have you. Welcome to the show.
Oh, my pleasure to be here. There's a dog here, so we're trying to get her under control. We'll see how that goes.
Good to be with you. So we'll just charge through, and if he or she has anything to say, just bring her on as well.
Okay, sure.
So just to kind of give our audience a little bit of context, it'd be great if you kind of give your background and kind of talk a little bit about your career journey to where you are now with TextNow.
Sure. And thanks for that. So I would say to, first approximation, though it's becoming less and less true as time goes on, but I would say still to first approximation, I'm a theoretical astrophysicist. So I have a PhD in physics. After I got my PhD, I worked at Princeton and the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton for a combined amount of 9 years. And I published 35 papers in theoretical astrophysics in several different areas of theoretical astrophysics. And to some degree, that prepared me for the world of big data and data science. After which I moved to, Silicon Valley here in the Bay Area. It just sounded like a really exciting thing to do. And I got my first job at this company called Voxer, which is a mobile messaging app. And that had 70 million users. I still actually kicking around 70 million users at the time. And I just basically learned how to work in the tech sector. What is data science? What's a product manager? What big data is? One of the things that actually surprised me the most was the technology of big data. That it was in many ways much more easy to use and advanced than in many of the computer-based technologies in academia. And that allowed, relatively small teams to do actually really interesting things with lots of data. And then from there, I've been working at startups and in taking a leadership position in startups, running data engineering, data science, product analytics, and in some cases, product management portions of the company. And now I'm the head of data at TextNow, and we are a 175-person company. We're been around for 10 years. We've been profitable. We never really raised venture capital at all, which is really interesting for the scale of the company that we're at right now. And we have 15 million users, monthly active users in the United States. And what we do here at TextNow is we offer a software application like an Android app or an iPhone app that you can download. And then we register a phone number for you, like 555-5555. Like a real number that you can use our app to make phone calls and receive phone calls. And so what we fundamentally do is connect, say, an Android app to the infrastructure providers of telecommunication companies in North America. And we offer the service for free. And so if you're, say, on Wi-Fi, you can receive and make phone calls for free. And how we monetize is through digital ads. And from that, we've made a really healthy business out of this company, and we're approaching, revenue run rates of order, $100 million or so with 15 million monthly active users.
Wow.
So,
awesome. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. I want to just start with your background, right? So
Sure.
Super interesting, theoretical astrophysics. You're in academia, you're in research, you're at Princeton. So why on earth did you decide that you wanted to jump out of that and go into data science, data analytics, commercially?
So there's a lot to unpack to that question. So nowadays, it's actually pretty common. It's a very, very common sort of situation, and where people get their PhDs and they're like, you know what, I'm not going to try this academia thing. It just seems way too hard. And the reason why it's way too hard is just the number of tenured faculty positions is very, very low, very low. I think somebody was telling me this year in astrophysics, there was like 4 jobs. Which is which there's not much you can do there. And so just so you know, like when I left academia, I think my last 2-3 years it was like of order like maybe 10 jobs a year.
Wow.
And realistically, like I was maybe only interested in 5 or 6 of those jobs. So when I left academia, so I was at the Institute for Advanced Study for Princeton, which is like super awesome, prestigious place or whatever. It was a little bit of a scandal because anybody who's there always gets a faculty position. And I think when, there's been sort of a lot of analysis done by myself and maybe some others of why I left 7.5 years ago. One of the reasons was because of the way I actually went about doing theoretical astrophysics was really different than my peer group. I was sort of hopping around from topic to topic and writing a paper or two or three or four or five every 2 or 3 years on one particular topic and then move on to another topic. So I ended up working in 5, 6, or 7, I would say, distinct topics in astrophysics, writing 2, 3, 4, 5 papers in each with totally different people every time. That's not the last 20 years, 25 years, that's just not how people have been doing it. What you do is you go into grad school and you basically say, I'm going to be a specialist in this area, and not just this area, but this sub area of this area for the next, 20 years. And I'm going to go, to these conferences, and I'm going to meet these people, and I'm going to rack up papers and citations in this area, and like say, this is the place that I'm really an expert in. And that's how I think the forcing function for that is sort of two things. It was basically the field got a little bit more mature. And the other forcing function is funding got more scarce. So how funding was working is, okay, we're the National Science Foundation, we're NASA or the Department of Energy. We're going to say, okay, this is a certain topic of astrophysics, say like extragalactic astronomy. We're going to partition that. We're going to allocate some budget to that, and then we're going to partition that into several different subtopics and then allocate money that way. And so if you're on a hiring committee at a university and you're, as a professor, you're like, okay, I'm getting research funding in this particular vertical.
Right.
You're not going to want to hire a generalist who can actually compete with everybody in every vertical. So what they do is they open up a position for a very particular subtopic of a field, like computational extragalactic astronomy. and so they don't, so a generalist who I think on a day-to-day basis for the culture of the department would be beneficial, because this person can talk to everybody and maybe, talk to all the grad students, all the postdocs, and maybe spark collaborations, cross-functionally, as we say in the industry here. But that's not really that welcome there. So
got it. Okay.
It used to be in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And, sort of interestingly, the only people I could relate to and regularly have, fun intellectual conversations with, most of them were over 60 years old. So not all of them, but most of them.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're, a generalist in a very interesting field. You decide to come out to Silicon Valley. So I'm really curious on your perspective on machine learning, on AI, and on data science, because obviously when you started to make that transition, I think the compute power kind of exploded, and all of a sudden it was almost like a lot of things that people have been talking about for 20, 30 years actually could be done, right? Like there could be real machine learning. So I'd like your perspective on that, but also it seems as though nowadays everything is machine learning, everything is AI, and it seems like the pendulum is almost swung the other way. How much of that is reality? How much of that is just marketing? I'd just like to hear kind of your perspective on those topics.
Well, I mean, when I think about the most important trend in the last 10 years, I would say the 10 years before that, from say 2000 to 2010. I mean, I'm not like an expert, I'm not like some Bay Area guru or something, but I would say everybody had computers became cheap enough from 2000 to 2010 where everybody had one in their house. And that's what made companies like Facebook and Twitter and whatever, Amazon, sort of explode, right? I would say the biggest technological trend, the most striking thing in the last 10 years is if you look at the quarterly revenues of AWS. So if, 10, 11 years ago, they're making like nothing. 10, 11 years ago. Now they're on track. They may have already surpassed it to $100 billion a year business. And what that means is, so the average everyday consumer is not like sort of directly affected by that or thinking about that. But what that means is that you can basically spin up really non-trivial levels of infrastructure and tooling, and in particularly big data infrastructure and tooling. And now how we actually think about products is from a data-driven or data-backed perspective, more and more so. Not, I think the tools are there, the revenue for AWS is there. I think the culture in companies is still evolving in that direction. But it's more so and more so evolving where it's more about data first. What can we do with the data?
Yep.
How do we shape the infrastructure and tooling to alter the product? And where, from 20, 30 years ago, what informed, it still kind of dominates the structure of companies today is how you inform yourself from doing or creating technology that consumers interact with is you do market research, you work with a designer, you think about what the market is, you think about what the interactions with the user should be, and then you give a list of requirements to the engineering team and they construct it. And then post facto, you instrument some events into the system, additionally outside of basic transactions to gain some insights on what's going on and how your idea was performing. I think we've moved in the direction, it's going to be the future where that is the actual iteration process. That's just sort of the initial condition. And the iteration process is what's going to be more important, which is how do we, cocoon this in data infrastructure and instrumentation so that we can evolve the product in the company and the business step by step to increase our product market fit, create new verticals, so on and so forth. And it's a much different way of thinking. It's a much different set of tools. It's the big data engineering, data infrastructure, data science set of tools that I think are what the future is moving to. And the ground truth for that, in my opinion, is the quarterly revenues of AWS. It's just, been going like that. So
interesting.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about machine learning in that context, sure. Right? So the AWS revenues are going up. There's access to all kinds of infrastructure. If you can pay for the infrastructure, you can do big data, you can do machine learning. Yep. So from what you see in the Bay Area and with your experiences of the startups you have, how much machine learning is really happening today, and what's the trend?
Well, I mean, if I'm really strict about the definition of machine learning, then it's basically like you're fitting a curve.
Yep.
Right? So, well, when you fit a curve, you need data to fit a curve, right? And in order to get the data to fit the curve, you have to be able to move it around relatively effortlessly to fit these curves, right? And so that's where the whole data infrastructure comes in. So, fitting a curve sounds trivial, right? If you're like, oh, I took, like that class in my second year of college or something, that's you just minimize some like error function. Like, what's so hard about that? So, but in the end of the day, I think what's hard about it is phrasing the whole problem quantitatively, getting cross-functional support, moving the data around, spinning up the infrastructure, QAing it, doing all the initial research that goes into it. And that more and more is the way people are iterating on their product. So I think there's like two directions we can take, like this general topic. But one direction I think that's maybe interesting to talk about that most people don't talk about, though it's totally obvious and everybody talks about it under their breath all the time, is the marketing aspect of ML or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So fundamentally, machine learning, I mean, you could, to zeroth order, most of it is just fitting curves, right?
Yep.
And what's interesting for me about big data and data science, sort of, and I think that's where most of the opportunity in the future is, and I don't see a lot of teams actually I see zero teams focusing on it, is what we're fundamentally studying is the behavior of a large number of human beings interacting with your platform, right? Mm-hmm. And so what you're actually studying is human beings, right? And you're studying people's behaviors. And there's very little emphasis on that. A lot of the emphasis is on the algorithm to fit the curve. And I actually think if you really look at the behavior of the people and look at it through the eyes of, at least from my eyes, somebody who's been in theoretical astrophysics for many years, and you can sort of make some, comparisons like, oh, maybe you can kind of think of all these people like particles, and the particles are maybe interacting or non-interacting, and they can get excited or de-excited. You can see some definite patterns that are not totally ignorable, that I think are really interesting, that seem to just be ignored by data scientists, and just a way of approaching the problem. It just doesn't seem to me often have that type of scientific bent, though in my opinion, maybe this is my bias, I think it should.
What would that look like? What would that look like? I mean, does that mean you need more kind of psychologists, human organization experts involved? Like what, more cross-functional teams? Like what's...
Psychologists or behavioral scientists could give input, but in the end of the day, they've never seen this data before. How the tech sector works is everybody's data is super private, right? Yep. So the hundreds of millions of downloads that we've gotten in our company, and the behaviors of the 100+ millions of users who have actually interacted with it, it's all our sort of private data. So it's hard to share certain things. But what I've noticed is in the 3 companies that I've worked in, I've seen some definite, very common pattern, and it's sort of independent of, obviously, very different kind of products. And I found it very profitable in each company to sort of bring this sort of intuition that I gained from physics and astronomy, theoretical astrophysics, or whatever, to actually approaching this problem. And you can actually come up with some like pretty obvious but penetrating insights relatively quick. Whereas I think it would have gotten me a lot longer if I came in with the approach of, okay, I'm going to start solving machine learning problems.
Right.
Which is, you would never in astronomy or in biophysics or molecular biology walk into your desk or your lab one day and say, okay, I'm going to start doing some statistics problems. What you're doing is, in molecular biology, you're studying large molecules, right? Or in theoretical astrophysics, you're studying like swirling gas around black holes. And here what we're studying is human beings.
Right.
And how it relates to the business that you're trying to optimize and make money for.
So the statistics is just a means to an end, right? Or
it's definitely there, because it's definitely there, and it's how you're making inferences, because there's no like fundamental theory. It's not like physics where I have a planet that's going around a star and I use Newton's laws and I can calculate the orbit of that planet, right? Yep. So everything here is statistical inference. So you have to be sort of strict about that. But most of the work, it comes into like phrasing the problems and understanding what you're actually trying to study, which are the humans or the consumers or your customers, right? Yep. Not necessarily the algorithm.
Right. Super. I love that perspective. I love that. Okay. So tell me this: you're head of data. So I'd love to hear kind of, top 2 or 3 challenges that you have on a day-to-day basis. And it can be organizational. It doesn't have to be necessarily having to do with, statistics. And then I'd love to see, top 2 or 3 biggest opportunities when you look at kind of your role and how it's evolving, and how that role in general is probably evolving at many companies like your own.
Yeah. So, like working backwards, I would say, in terms of your questions, the head of data position wasn't really there when I started out here.
Yep.
Where data science and data engineering were sort of put together.
Yep.
Right? It's really important, for many, many reasons, that in my opinion, that they're put together. It makes both groups of people much happier in multiple ways, and they work better together, much like order of magnitude better together, I think, if they're together in one team. So that is actually really a positive thing. And I am someone who likes leadership. I like to be, I like to mentor people. I really like actually hiring. I'm not the best person in terms of like organization and running scrums and filling out JIRAs or so on and so forth. So I always get people on my team who like doing that to help out. But you definitely need that. So I think, going forward, it's comforting to see that the head of data type of position or VP of data science or chief data officer type of positions are becoming more and more prevalent, especially for companies that become successful, because once you become successful, you have a lot of users, you have a lot of data, and you have to basically use it to get yourself to the next level, because the competition out there is doing that. And it's actually, pretty fierce, right? So that's, I think, a really interesting trend. And that for individual contributors, I think that's also a positive trend. They are going to be working in orgs that understand them, that support them, and I give them more fulfilling opportunities.
Yep.
I think, in terms of general trends, it's interesting to see when the organizational structure and organizational thinking in companies evolves to the point where it catches up with the quarterly revenue plot of AWS. So I think the quarterly revenue plot of AWS is a leading indicator, and the lagging indicator is how organizations kind of shift their thinking and where data people sit in that organization, the role data people play in the organizations. I'm interested to see in the future how that evolves. And, one thing I was talking about, I talk to this with people on my team all the time. I feel like data people, particularly the more senior ones, are sort of almost like a geometric mean or a combination of a staff engineer and a product manager. Yep. Where they're strategic thinking, or they like to think strategically. They really like to think about the bottom line. And when they deploy data infrastructure, MapReduce code, machine learning algorithms and tooling to solve problems, it's all from sort of like an business opportunity standpoint. And so it's really going to be interesting to see how organizations cope with this in the future, because it is a truism that if you can figure out how to leverage your data, then your business decisions are going to be better, because any business decision is the combination of logic, some prescribed logic, and information, right? So information is data. So the more information that you can leverage, or the more data you leverage, the better your product is going to be, and the better your company is going to be able to make decisions. So I think it's going to be an interesting next 10 years.
Makes total sense. So Ari, really appreciate you being on the podcast today. If members of the community want to reach out, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I don't think there are many Aristotle Socrates is on LinkedIn. And you can reach out to me. I think I'm on Twitter, Aristotle_Soc at Twitter. But, you can reach out to me at LinkedIn. Go for it.
Fantastic. So Ari Socrates, head of data, TextNow. Thanks again for your time, and we really enjoyed the conversation.
Okay, well, thanks a lot.